Here's the photography presentation on photographic composition. Composition simply is the arrangements of elements within the frame. So it's the placement of whatever it is that you're photographing within the frame of your image. Let's break this down simply. Your picture has three separate depths of field, or three separate distances. Foreground. Foreground is the area closest to the viewer. This tends to also be towards the bottom of the page. In this image of the beach, we see this piece of wood, driftwood, on the beach. So the driftwood itself, the sand here, and a little bit of the shoreline is in the foreground, or closest to the viewer. In the background, we can see the sun, we see the clouds, we see the sky. We also see this little island of rocks in the middle of the picture, in the background. The background is farthest away from the viewer. The middle ground is just that. It's between the background and the foreground. So in this picture, the middle ground is this rock formation to the left. There's a little rock or person in the water. I'm not sure what that is. There's that. And also the water itself is in the middle ground. So when thinking about composition, you want to think about what do you have in the foreground, the middle ground, and background. How are your items arranged? These are things to think about. So what is the subject that's being photographed in these two images? If you said sunflower, you're correct. Even though the subject is the same in each image, how are they displayed differently? Well, if you said that the image on the left shows the flower, but it shows hundreds of them. It fills the space. It is a landscape of beautiful, colorful sunflowers. So the amount of flowers in this picture, just how vast this field is amazing. What the picture on the right does is, it does the opposite. Instead of hundreds of thousands of flowers and filling up the space very vastly, it fills the space with just one single flower. And we can see the detailing of the flower. We see the overlapping of the petals. We see the detailing of the center. We see the dew, the water droplets on the flower petals. So here we have a macro image. Here we have a landscape image. Now the landscape image, you're going to notice the horizon line right here in the background. The horizon line is where the sky meets the ground. Right. So pictures exist for three reasons. Right. Composing pictures that are interesting get attention and they deliver a message. So what is it the message that you're sending? Are you photographing to tell a story? Are you photographing to convey a feeling? Or are you trying to make a statement? Either way, that is part of composition. That is why you're taking the picture in the first place. That's a reason, and that's what makes a huge difference between taking a photograph, which is set up, or a snapshot. In general, good pictures result from careful attention to some of these basic elements of composition, together with appropriate lighting and an interesting subject. And we'll get to lighting a little bit later. Going on about interesting subject, you might ask yourself, well, what am I going to photograph? Well, theoretically, there are three basic interesting subject matters. People are number one. People are interesting because of, well, why do you think? People show emotion We show emotion on our faces. We show emotion in our bodies. Think about actors. Okay, how many emotions can they show in a single film? All right. Same thing with just anybody. We show emotion, and that's one of the reasons that make us so interesting. That's why animals comes in number 2 to the list. Okay, animals also show emotion. How many of you photograph your pets at home because they're doing something cute? Right? Whether they're pouting because they want your table scraps from dinner, whether they are tired, exhausted, and they're sleeping. I know that's what a lot of my pictures are of my dogs, of them sleeping. Right? But animals show emotion as well. Third is tide for landscapes and still lifes. Although I do have to say I feel that landscapes are inherently more interesting than still lifes. So a landscape is just that. It's land. It's nature. It has a horizon line, foreground, middle ground, background. The entire picture is in focus. How many landscape pictures have you taken with your cameras? At the beach, or in a forest, in the woods, if you've ever been to the desert, right? Or even just on a clear field on a beautiful sunset. And those are landscape images. A still life is simply just arranging different items into an image and placing them together. So here we have a picture, we have grapes, and we have a pear. So we have all of these items arranged together in a single place, and it's photographed. Once again, these are the 3 interesting subject matters. Going along with your subjects, right? Well, there are 2 key elements to every single picture that's out there. There's the subject, or the main focus of the image, and then there's the treatment. The treatment is how other elements are affecting the subject. Right? So as we did say, the 3 main subjects are people, or a person, animals, or an animal, and landscapes, or still lifes. I just put them on two separate rungs. And then there's treatment. So these are just a few ways that an image can be affected. The camera angle. Okay? The camera angle is, well, what angle are you photographing the subject from? From above, from below? Are you tilting the camera? Is it eye level? We'll get into that a little bit later. Composition, or how you're composing your picture, okay? Where elements are placed within the image. Lighting. Lighting is something we do get to on its own and is pretty vast, so we're going to hold up on that. But lighting also has different directions. There's different quality of lighting, different color lighting, as well as directions. And there's cropping. You can take a great picture, or you can take an okay picture, and then through cropping or changing what you want in the picture, adjusting, taking away, you can make a picture better. There's a whole other section of notes to this as well, so we're going to put that on hold. And then there's photo editing, okay? Or like what we'll be doing is working with Photoshop. Right? But you don't want to rely on that to have a good picture. You want to be able to arrange it yourself. You don't want to rely on just simple photo editing. So once again, all pictures have 2 key elements. What are they? You guessed it, subject and treatment. All right, so what is the difference between these 2 pictures? Which image do you think is better? Why do you think that? If you said that the picture on the right is the better of the 2, you would be correct. The picture on the left, well, both pictures have the same subject, the man and the bird. However, the picture on the left is pretty cluttered. We have this building in the background, whether it is a shed or a barn, I'm not sure, but there's some sort of structure in the background. We have all these leaves and plants and stuff in the background as well. What happens is this is cluttering up the picture. Even though the items in the background are out of focus, they're still not out of focus enough to show that the man is the main subject. It's cluttering the picture. There's too much going on. The eyes looking all over the place. Something else that's negative is the subject has this major shadow strewn across his face. Picture on the right. We have a nice clear background. Now, what we did here was the photographer shot from a lower angle, which means they're photographing looking up slightly at the subject. We know it's still a similar scene. We see the plants and everything, but instead of having the background as the shed, we have the nice clear sky. So we're keeping that simple. The subject is once again taking up majority of the frame, and we also don't have as bad a shadow across his face. So once again, two pictures very similar. One is better than the other because of placement of the subject, having a simpler background, not obscuring our subject. What other reasons do you think this picture is better for? Okay, here's some more tidbits of information. All right, the less interesting your subject is, the more treatment it needs. So in this picture, we have a still life. We have the peaches, we have this pitcher, we have the cloth. So the treatment here is the lighting. The lighting is coming from the left, and it's creating some very interesting shadows on the objects themselves. We are also photographing this still life from a upwards angle looking down. Okay, so this would be a high angle shot. So here we're using two different types of treatment. We're using lighting and camera angle. Also note it's important to give your subject somewhere to go in the picture, as opposed to this picture right here, where the gentleman is climbing up these very large steps. Right? It looks like he's climbing out of the picture. While the picture does follow the rule of thirds, which you'll learn later, it's placing him about 1/3 from the side. He is in crossroads for the grid, but as I said, he also looks like he's climbing out of the picture. We have all this empty space. Try to avoid that. Try to give your subject a place to go, literally. And then visual clutter ruins a picture, so keep it simple. Just like the man with the bird. There's a lot going on in the background. There's a lot of something going on in the background for this picture. We have the kitchen, we have those shelving, we have a back room with a fan in the back. There's a lot going on. Visual clutter can really ruin a picture, and it can take away from the subject. So keep it simple. Watch this. Here is how we can make some of these pictures better. In the first picture of the still life, once again, we changed up the camera angle. This camera angle now is from directly above that subject. We have a very simple background. Inherently, this picture is more interesting than the previous one, although the previous one did have some better treatments of the picture that made it interesting, but I definitely find this one more interesting. The picture of the man, all right? So we have a bigger picture, a bigger view of what's going on. We see and get a scale for just how big these steps are. And finally, instead of the bigger picture with the dog, we've cropped out all that extra detail that we no longer needed.